Determining whether a project is appropriate for an instructional design solution is an important part of the instructional design process. If you determine a project is not necessarily appropriate for an instructional design solution, you can save yourself and your company a lot of time and a lot of money, and it alleviates the problem of casting a negative upon the whole concept of training and taking workers away from their work and all those things that we need to consider when we talk about training in the first place. So the first thing that you want to do if you're looking to determine whether or not a project is appropriate for instructional design solutions is to perform an analysis of the performance itself. And what this means is it's the process of analyzing the human performance problems systematically and identifying their root causes. This means understanding what the systematic issues might be, as well as the processes that employees have to go through when they are actually performing the tasks that you may consider training them upon. This distinguishes problems that could be solved by training from problems that require other types of managerial actions, which we've already discussed. So if we were to label the parts of the human performance problems, we have to first start with a definition of what problem means, and it literally means something thrown forward. That is a result of a discrepancy between the actual, which is what is, and the ideal, what should be, which requires present or future action. The actual is the condition, meaning the existing state of affairs, and the ideal is the criterion, meaning the desired state of affairs. So once we figure out what the difference between the condition and the criterion is, we've established a gap. Absent a difference between the condition and the criterion, there is no gap, and therefore there is no need. The reason for the gap is the problem's cause, and the consequences of the gap are the problem's symptoms. So you can see that there is a difference in treating something causally and treating something symptomatically. If you have an underlying performance problem and you're only treating it symptomatically, clearly you're never going to get to the root cause of it. So understanding the differences in what you're looking at requires a depth of understanding with regard to the processes involved and the processes involved with regard to the particular problem that you're trying to determine whether or not training is the option. So we would establish then a model would be a good idea. Maybe more than one model might be appropriate. Always surveying a couple of models is a good idea to see which one actually fits the circumstance that you're working with. So there are two categories of problem-solving models that apply to what we're talking about. There are comprehensive models, which are useful for scanning the big picture of an organization to identify problems, and then there are situational specific models which provide guidance in dealing with the kind of everyday types of problems or symptoms that prompt managers to request the aid of instructional designers in the first place. Gilbert has a comprehensive model, which is his performance matrix. And it's called a matrix because it allows instructional designers to examine 6 different hierarchically ordered performance levels. And each level corresponds to a different value system or vantage point by which the performance can be viewed. Each level also contains 3 related cells, models, measures, and methods that can be applied to the particular situation at hand. Gilbert uses the term model to mean a criterion, ideal, goal, expectation, standard, or objective, and he uses measure as an analogous to condition or actual results. The method is the solution, a way or to narrow or close the gap between what is, which is the measure, and what should be, which is the model. When comparing those two things, the matrix can be applied to organizational settings, and Gilbert suggests only using the bottom 3 levels of the matrix, which is policy regarding institutional systems, in other words, what works within the policy structure of the organization, strategy, which refers to the job systems of the organization. In other words, if you're trying to solve a problem with an unrealistic solution given these things, the tactics, which is the 3rd level, or task systems that you try to deploy will not work. Gilbert's performance matrix is applied to organizational settings only when the 3 bottom levels of the matrix are appropriate. So you have to look before you select a model to see if it's the right model for the situation. And again, that speaks to policy, which is the institutional systems, the strategy, which is the job systems, and the tactics, which refer to the task systems. Another situation-specific model comes from Mager and Pipe. I say that wrong every single time. And their model states that in a given situation, one can troubleshoot the cause of the problem and then select the appropriate solution. Beginning by asking questions about the situation and collecting information about what is happening, what should be happening, why the gap is important, and how the gap should be closed will provide the person collecting the data the ability to bring forward what is needed for appropriate analysis of the situation. So these are only two models for performance analysis. There are a number of others that exist. Rumler and Brock, 1995, talk about managing the white space on the organization chart, and they look at performance problems from an organization, a process standpoint, and a job or performer level, 3 different levels throughout the hierarchy of their model. And their main thesis of their book, Improving Performance, was that there is a lot of white space in between functions on an organizational chart, whereby handoffs are non-existent or poor, and mistakes happen, and that has an impact on the bottom line of the business. So if you were to look at your situation, you could probably take any broad model and utilize it to determine whether or not the problem at hand is appropriate for training in the first place. But looking at the things that we discussed last week in terms of the managerial options to training, you might want to consider the big picture, and even before you apply a model, say what else is going on here to correctly diagnose.